So welcome, everyone, to this evening's talk, Sounds Canadian, Canadian Sounds, an evening with Amy King. My name is Kirk McNally. I'm a professor of music technology here at the University of Victoria. And I want to first thank my co-host for this evening, Dr. Amandine Pras from the University of Lethbridge, for her help in putting together this evening's talk and the other student events that we've organized for this week. She's an inspiration to both myself and my students, so I greatly appreciate her help in putting this all together. Before I introduce Amy, I wanted to pause and acknowledge the lands and traditional territories that we are joining you from tonight. I'm on the UVic campus, the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, where the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples' historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Last evening, I had a discussion with my Indigenous friend and colleague, Carrie Newman, about delivering this land acknowledgement, and just for his advice and ways that we can ensure that it is important, ensure that it is heard, and ensure that it does not become a procedural and perfunctory act. So through this talk, or through my talk with Carrie, he said that one of the ways to do this was to take a moment to pause and learn something about the indigenous relationship with the lands that we are on. And to that end, he shared a story with me, told to him by a friend of his, about Camosun. And this is a name that, if you're joining us from afar, it won't mean much. If you're from Victoria, it will mean something. But it's a name that I hear and I see daily on my commute to UVic. It's a land that's quite close to here, and the name of a college. So I don't have time to go through the story, but I will say that I'd encourage you all to find stories such as this. And if you're interested in the Camosun story, you can Google Bradley Dick and Camosun. And I can absolutely say that my understanding of the word and the lands that I'm on tonight has been transformed upon reading that story. Tonight, we're talking about Canadian music, and I'm going to take a moment to read from the letter that I wrote to my administration seeking funding for this talk. And it reads, I'm writing to illustrate the value to our school and community of having Amy King as a visitor to UVic this year. Amy is a highly respected music producer and recording engineer at the legendary Grant Avenue Studios in Hamilton, Ontario. Originally built by the brothers Bob and Daniel Lanois in 1976, the studio has played a significant role in shaping and supporting the careers of countless Canadian musicians, and by virtue, the sound of Canadian music. As a female recording engineer, Amy has a unique and incredibly important voice within the Canadian music scene, where women music producers and recording engineers are still a clear minority. Beyond her recording work, Amy has been very active in bringing awareness to the importance of music within our communities. And within the Hamilton community, she's offered gratis studio time to associations such as An Instrument for Every Child, Hamilton Out of the Cold, and multiple other school programs. She's also provided gratis recording work to complete fundraising albums in support of Hamilton Neighbor to Neighbor and a project in support of the Syrian Newcomers Fund. So on behalf of Amandine and myself, I want to extend a very warm welcome to Amy King, and it's always strange to say welcome and applause in this Zoom mode, but thank you for being here, Amy.
Thank you guys for having me. It's great. Oh, thanks. Yeah, very, very strange. It's wonderful that we can all still connect, but it just still feels so disconnected at the same time. So this building is so used to having people and sweat and just crowds in here all the time, and it's been eerily quiet. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting back to some type of, I hate saying some type of normal, because what is that really? But something where we can actually be creative in each other's presence again. I think Kirk and Amandine, we were chatting a little bit yesterday about, you don't really realize it until it's taken away from you, how much of music is actually communicated completely non-verbally, just through presence and being with each other and body language. And you really, really lose that. And it's something that I totally had taken for granted until it was kind of ripped away back in March. So yeah, hopefully soon, fingers crossed. So yeah, that's great. And thank you for the lovely intro. It's strange to hear somebody say all that stuff about oneself. So thank you for pointing out all the good.
Well, thank you for accepting this invitation. I think COVID has been challenging for everybody, but we also see the great opportunity to connect with people within Canada. It's such a really big country, right? And it's difficult most of the time to do meetings among each other. So I think COVID has gave us the opportunity to this workshop, but also I know the Sound Girls chapters have been flourishing this year in Canada, and I think it's
That's
also
great.
thanks to those online community
That's
events.
great.
So I have the first question for you. Could you talk about what and when brought about your entry into sound recording and music production?
Oh boy. Well, I hate to sound so cliche about it, but kind of when I look back on life, it just seems like something that was kind of inevitable for me. I grew up on the east coast of Canada, so in a little town, actually one of the larger towns in Newfoundland, kind of mid province. If anybody's familiar with the province of Newfoundland at all, it's kind of shaped like a triangle. My town's right in the middle. It's not on the ocean. It's on a pulp and paper river. So I grew up there in the 90s when the internet wasn't a thing. I know that's really hard for people to kind of grasp, especially these days. Nobody had cell phones. We all had a landline, like most houses had one landline. There was no bookstore in my hometown that had, sound magazines or anything like that. So for me, growing up, like the career choices that sort of were laid out in front of us were, teacher, doctor, lawyer, or just stay at home and raise a family. So I had no idea that this was even an option, really, let alone an option for a woman, just an option, period. I also grew up heavily involved in the church and I look back on that and I think that's definitely where I cut my teeth as a musician. And that's where you learn how to play with other people and communicate ideas with other people and respect other people's space and their playing ability and their talent and their abilities. So I knew from an early age that I definitely wanted to be involved in music. So I started taking piano lessons and hated playing piano. I shouldn't say I hated playing piano. I hated performing. Performing seemed to take years off my life every time I did it. So I started to listen to church music. That was the only thing I was allowed to listen to. Completely immersed in gospel Christian music. So I don't know, everybody here is probably way too young to even know what this is. Anybody? Cassette tape? Yeah? I had hundreds of these and they were all gospel music. So I discovered at an early age that if you take a piece of Scotch tape or something and put over the top, that you could actually re-record over the content. So I would get my lovely little Sony Ghetto Blaster on Saturday mornings and record Casey's Top 40 and American Top 40 just to get a little sense of what was not Christian music at that time. And my parents were none the wiser until eventually I did get found out, and then all of the cassettes were completely destroyed. So that was tragic. But what happened after that is I kind of befriended some people at school who were listening to what was really popular at that time. So Smashing Pumpkins, the Seattle scene, so Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, Tool, pretty like heavy gritty stuff. And I started to really get into that and I dissected every note and didn't really care so much about listening to the vocals. I was really focusing on all the sounds and trying to figure out how they achieved what they achieved. So with that, I mean, back then you're making CDs and cassettes and there were still credits and artwork. So I would take that and just memorize the credits. I probably could recite the credit books for every album that came out between like 93 and 99 because I just immersed myself in that entirely. So I knew I wanted to be, I didn't want my name on the front of a record. I wanted my name on the inside as, recorded by or produced by or having played on something because I knew that performance definitely wasn't in me. So then I think I was about 13 or 14 and my hometown, which is really odd because it's quite small, had a giant concert and the Beach Boys came. The Rainbow Butt Monkeys, who turned into Finger 11, Tea Party, and John Bon Jovi, which is just the weirdest lineup when you think about it. And I snuck off to it because, again, church, I wasn't allowed to go. And I remember standing there, and when those harmonies hit me, and then the kick drum made my pant leg move, it was just like, oh my gosh, my brain actually, it exploded. And I knew I had to be a part of that process. I just had to. It became completely ingrained in my DNA at that moment. So then I started to seek out, how I could start doing that. So I would borrow recording gear and simple soundboard stuff from my church and bring it home and try to route it through my ghetto blaster and record things and then loop over top. And it was just a big sonic mess, but it was a really fun way to learn how to do things. So then the time came to tell my parents that I wanted to get a job in the music business. And that doesn't really go over too well for the most part, because a lot of parents think, especially in an isolated place back then, that the music biz was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And sure, of course, that can be a part of any business, really, but they were having none of it. So I decided to go take some academic courses that I was really interested in at that time. So I went to University of New Brunswick in Fredericton and studied psychology and philosophy for a while, just to sort of prove to them that I could make great grades and do it if I wanted. And then I moved back to Newfoundland to study naval architecture because I was very interested in that. And I did that for a couple of years. And then finally I said, okay, it's time for me to go do what I want to do. I'll figure out how to do that. And I visited a local music store. Long and McQuaid had just bought kind of the local music store. So I went there to buy a Line 6 delay pedal and stumbled upon a pamphlet for a recording school. And I thought, holy crap, like they actually teach this stuff? This is amazing. So I enrolled in it, got accepted, and it was a school that was here in Hamilton until about, I think, 2006, and then they moved their campus to Toronto. So I got accepted, started the school 2 months later, and then, so my goal was to finish the course and move back to Newfoundland to kind of start my own place. But I got hired here in September of 2002 and just kind of made myself indispensable, and I've been here ever since. So that's kind of the very, I know that wasn't a short answer, but that's kind of the short answer to how that all came to fruition. So
That's amazing. No, and don't feel rushed to make any of your answers short. This is fantastic. I love that we share another thing, and that is the rainbow butt monkeys.
I know,
Yeah,
right?
that's just shows how small the Canadian music scene is. Maybe
Yeah.
um, the lead singer from Rainbow Butt Monkeys was the drummer in my high school jazz band,
No kidding.
and it would have been
Wow.
about that time that he was playing. So that's really just that's another funny one for us.
That's awesome.
Um, so you referenced your piano background and some
Hmm.
of your gospel music and singing in the church. Um, how does how does your how's, how does your musical background factor into your production and recording work today?
I was talking to my colleague Bob actually about that just today because we're both musicians and I try to play anything I can get my hands on, but formally trained in piano, and he's kind of the same way. And we just sort of said to each other, I don't know how anybody can actually do this job that doesn't have at least some basic music theory knowledge or some basic playing knowledge, because I use it every day. Even if I'm doing a spoken word session, you still use tone and inflection and lilt and note of voice. So it comes into play in every aspect. But the biggest one for me is that I don't know if I asked every single person here who enjoyed learning music theory, but I think a lot of people would be lying if they said that they loved it. But after my second week working here, I called my piano teacher from Newfoundland, and I just thanked her because she was one of those women that just made you learn it, and but sort of made it fun at the same time. And I needed it, and I needed it in a big way around here because we do a lot of sessions with classical musicians. We also do a lot of sessions with highly trained jazz guys. So, if I've got 7 guys out on the floor and they say something like, can you punch us in as a group on bar 132 on the 2 and get us out before the time change of 5/4 and then just punch the violin in, on the A flat. If I don't know what they're talking about, it's not going to be long before they won't come back again. So if I didn't have that knowledge going into this, I think it'd be much harder to learn that as an adult if I didn't have that knowledge as a child. And then just playing in the church, we actually had quite a large congregation for such a small town. We had about 1,000 people on Sundays, and quite a large youth group as well. So our music group was vast. We had a horn section, organ, piano, bass, guitars, drums, and it was pretty good. So learning how to collaborate with other people, and just, I don't want to say tell them what to do, because that comes off as being very arrogant and wrong. But oftentimes in here, you do have to call shots. We were just chatting about it a little bit before the talk started here about, a role as an engineer or producer. When do you interject? Well, often you have to interject, especially if there isn't really a hired producer, and the band needs some help or needs some guidance or needs someone to stop a fight or pacify a situation. So oftentimes we as engineers sort of walk the line between production and engineering. And I was sitting on a committee a couple weeks ago for the production awards for the Junos. And we were all talking about the same thing, like how often does an engineer actually do more of the production than a producer does? And we don't really always get credit for kind of all the work that we do put in to records. And we're the ones that are doing a lot of the recording, a lot of the editing, a lot of the mixing, and a lot of the stuff that needs to be done when the band takes a break or after the session's over, kind of thing. And also with tuning, I find so many people nowadays don't even know how to tune their own instruments anymore. They rely on a cell phone tuner or a digital tuner. So having that muscle memory in your head about what A440 is or what intervals should be, it really, really helps a session go a lot quicker if the band or the artist is having trouble with that aspect of things. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. So I know that we have some music to play as well.
Oh yeah, right. So a good example for having that knowledge is a band that I recorded a few years ago called So Long 7. Very eccentric group of musicians. And this probably isn't the best tune to play, but it really gives everybody a sense of the complexity of some of the instruments and how difficult it is sometimes to put it all together. So these guys played all live off the floor, tabla, banjo, violin, acoustic guitar, and in a couple of the tunes there was a talking flute. And they had to be punched in a lot because the songs are quite long. So we've actually chopped most of these tunes down for the sake of time. Most of them run at about 7 or 8 minutes. So I think we've chopped them down to about 1:30 or 2 minutes. So they're very complex pieces, and having the ability to read music, read notation, or read Nashville number charts is incredible. Like whenever anybody asks me what they should study to get into this, I know that there's an audio school aspect of this thing, but I usually say, like, kind of forget about the formal training for like an actual recording school. Either pay a studio and let you sit in to actually learn stuff, learn some psychology, music theory, because it's so important and so needed. So anyway, we're gonna listen to So Long 7, a track called No Jazz for Elvis. So I think Amandine's gonna take care of that for us, actually. I love that track. Those guys had so much fun making that record, and I think I do touch on this somewhere else in going over some of the questions earlier, but when people are having fun in the studio, I believe that that totally translates to the listener. And those guys took that to the next level. It was just, we did the whole record in 3 days, and it was such a good hang. The music was fantastic. The sounds were good. The guys could play their instruments. It was definitely in my top 5 of records that I've gotten a chance to work on while here. So anyway, I'll stop.
Where were they from, just before we move on?
I think most of them now live in Toronto, but from all over. And the one gentleman they brought in to play talking flute was from Montreal, but he only played on a couple tunes, and also some oud. And I think he might have been from out west somewhere actually, but I'm not entirely sure. So.
Okay, so thank you. So we had a question about your audio education in general, and you mentioned that you went to a recording school and didn't really take much from it. So how did you learn audio then?
Okay, well, I'll rewind and I'll retract a bit of my statement, because I think audio programs really have changed a ton in the last 20 years. So when I did my class, there was, I think, 35 people taking that class, and some guys have been doing live sound for years, and then others had no idea even what a compressor was. And so all of us were gathered around a console, not much bigger than this, and our levels of learning were so highly contrasted. There was no way that they could actually teach each of us consistently. It was I really hope nobody from that school is watching, because it really did teach me some great things and some great networking, but I didn't learn much. I really didn't learn much in that course whatsoever. So in the first 2 weeks of being hired here, I learned more than I did during the entire course. One of the other things that I should probably mention, my father, I don't have musicians in my family, and I have a ginormous extended family, but my dad is an industrial electrician for what was the Newfoundland subsidiary of Bell Canada. And his job was to go around to isolated communities in Newfoundland and Labrador to work on the generating systems for communications, so that when storms hit or the power grid went down, which happened a lot, that those isolated communities could still have telephones and call the hospital if they needed and whatnot. So my dad started bringing old circuit boards home when I was just a wee girl, and the circuit boards then look a lot different than like the inside of our cell phones or our computers nowadays. So they look a lot like, I do have an example, hold on, I hope you guys can see it. Can you see that stuff? Okay, so this is actually a module strip from this console. So every strip looks like that when you take it apart. So my dad would bring these things home and then have to fix them. And so he got me to, help and try to explain things to me as best he could. And that was a skill that I definitely needed here at Grand Avenue, because we run mostly analog gear. And if we had to hire somebody to come and fix that or help with maintenance, we'd basically be bankrupt in 2 weeks, because there's always things that need fixing, capacitors that burn out and whatnot. So sorry, I'm interjecting that because it has to do with the workflow here at Grant, and one of the things that I had to learn and learn quickly. So I did get hired here, learn more in the first 2 weeks. My colleague, who's still the owner here today, started the studio in '76 with Bob and Dan Lanois. So he took a giant leap of faith hiring me, because he had a rule that he would not hire anybody who had gone to an audio course. Like none. He wouldn't even read the resumes. So the fact that I had the music theory and a little bit of psychology in university and the knowledge of analog components, that's why I got hired here. So he kind of took me under his wing. And I don't want to sound cliche about it, but he really did become my mentor. So he threw me right into the fire early on. They were in the middle of doing a Gordon Lightfoot record, and Gord actually had an aneurysm during that time and ended up in the hospital, and they didn't think that he was going to pull through, but he did. He came out of the coma and wanted to immediately get back to work. So Bob was like, look, you want to tag team me on this? I think you're ready. I think you can handle it. Let's just see what happens. So that was kind of my first foray into this world, and not just washing the coffee mugs kind of thing. It was pretty incredible. And I didn't realize the gravity of that at that time, because I didn't really know enough about how the business worked and how generally you're an assistant for years and years and years. You don't make any money, you know, that kind of thing. So Bob really, I tell him all the time, he took a giant chance on me, and I'm thankful for that over and over and over again. So I don't know, I sort of forget what your question was about that, but I hope I answered it.
You perfectly answered it.
Actually, if we do have time for another track to sort of along those lines, I'd love to play a little bit of a Gordon Lightfoot tune, because there's a little bit of a lesson in there for engineers / producers as well. Because when Gord comes in to record, usually what he does is he just goes out on the floor. He's got his tone tuner going in the background. He's got a click track, sometimes like an audible one, just like from an old Dr. Click that just goes ding, dong, dong, dong. And he lays down a bunch of tunes, just him, vocal and acoustic guitar. Then he takes those home to study and kind of come up with string arrangements and drum parts. He actually writes all of the parts for all the guys in his band. So he took, I think it was 22 or 27 songs home, worked on them, wrote some parts. Then he decided he wanted to not do any of that and just leave it as guitar and vocal. So here we are kind of stuck with, I don't want to say crappy recording, but they are not the cleanest recording at all. So it's a really good lesson, even when you know somebody and you know their habits. And we knew that he wanted to, you know, come back and rework with the band. We were not expecting him to decide to not do that. So it would have really paid us to treat that with a little bit more of a finality kind of thing. So you can hear all sorts of noises. I actually think you can hear my dog collar scratching at one point. And then he just decided, you know what? I want my audience and my fans to hear what it sounds like just in the infancy stages of songwriting. And Bob and I were like, oh my God, really? Like, this is just, I don't know, this is scary. But people are really digging the record because they love the fact that it's so human and it's so intimate and it's vulnerable. But for me, it's a good lesson. And it's also a good example of not such a clean recording. So if we could play the Lightfoot, a little bit of that Lightfoot tune would be great.
I wasn't easy as I'd ever been until I found her. I never could win. We realized we had nothing to fear. We'd be okay now, the answer is clear. Think about us if you will. Next time you feel a chill. I was extremely into doing what I pleased, so I turned around and I was down upon my knees. Easy come, easy go, easy flow. She's with me wherever I may go. Easy come, easy go, easy flow.
Lovely tune, but I just wish we had a second chance at it, really. But anyway, that's the beautiful thing about recording and mixing as well. Like, there's always going to be something you're going to want to have changed or done differently. And there comes a point when you just have to let it go and treat it like a child that you're sending off to school for the first time or something. So just to go back a little bit with your training question, Amandine, what Bob really taught me is that music is about the human connection. As he said to me, and I'll quote him on this, I could teach a monkey how to use the dials and buttons and faders, but you can't teach somebody to have the empathy to deal with a singer who's having a bad day. And that is so absolutely true. All of this stuff behind me, all of the rack gear that's here that you guys can't see, it's all useless if you don't connect with the people on the other side of the glass, because it's a really daunting process. Even for guys like Gord, like, he's on album number, I think 24 studio records. We all know musicians who've made hundreds of albums, but there's a real vulnerability to it, and it's scary even for those guys. So if we can't make them feel comfortable, all of this stuff doesn't matter. So he really taught me that it has nothing to do with the gear. It's all about how you treat people and having some empathy and imagining yourself on the other side of the glass as well. So that's it.
Oh, fantastic. No, I think that's a perfect recording to show where the music just reaches right past and through all of the
Yeah.
other, things that you, yes, of course, might want to do differently.
Yeah.
So I understand completely. That's great. So can we just talk about the studio for a bit? Let's
Sure.
just talk about the history of the studio because, being part of making that recording, and having Gord there, and sort of that lineage within Canada is I think something worthy to speak about. But
Sure.
so fill us in on what's the history with Grant Avenue? Where did it come from? How is it
Okay.
featured? And
If you guys look it up online, there's a lot of misinformation. So I'll set a little bit of the record straight. So Bob and Dan Lamois moved from Quebec to a town called Ancaster, Ontario, which is just outside of Hamilton. And they were playing music, more so Dan than Bob. Dan was a kick-ass guitar player even when he was a kid. So they started recording people in Dan and Bob's mom Jill, who just passed away a couple weeks ago, actually, in her basement in Ancaster. So they had a decent little console down there, and I think they did the typical, like egg cartons on the walls, and there was a freezer and a furnace, like, and you had to squeeze down this stairway to get down there. But they ended up doing a couple of Raffi records down there, some Bruce Coburn, and that's when they kind of realized, oh gosh, I think we've outgrown Mama's house, So in '76, they decided to start looking for property, and they wanted to keep it out of the GTA area because there was already a lot of big boy studios there, and they wanted Hamilton to have one here. So they were looking at two locations. One was more in the west end of the city and more of kind of a commercial, larger space, and this place. So they chose it, and I'm really glad they did for so many reasons. But often more space is something I'd like to have, but paying the overhead on a place like that, like heating, insurance, property taxes for the odd session you might get where you need space for a choir or an orchestra, they chose wisely. And one of the beautiful things about this place is when you walk in, there's no receptionist or any of that. There's no corporate gibble gobble. It's homey. It feels like you're making music at home, but yet the stuff that we have here is super high quality. So they started it in '76 and got rolling really quickly. And of course, everybody knows what Dan ended up doing. So Dan and Bob Lamois sold to Bob Deutsch, who's still here, in 1985. So Bob Deutsch has owned it since then. He's seen a couple of just silent partners come and go, but he's had it for, gosh, how long is that? It's 85, 30. Oh, my math is terrible. Anyway, a long time. And he started working with Gord in '95. So Lightfoot's been coming here since '95. Of course, U2 has been here, Johnny Cash. Oh gosh, all sorts of people. So a lot of artists who come here still come here because they want to sit where Bono sat or sing into the microphone that Gord sang into. But I'm finding that that's becoming less and less important for people because a lot of people don't even know who some of those guys are anymore. But that said, even when you walk in the doors, you can feel this, there's an energy to it. There's an electricity in the building. And we did a big reno in 2015. And when we did that, I found some really interesting things hidden in the walls and in the ceilings. And to just sort of think about the changes that the studio has seen in the music business and in the world in general and technology over the years. It's gone through some pretty crazy times and it's resilient. And I say that to Bob all the time. It's like a cat, because even since I've been here, we've almost burned down twice. There have been like grow-ups in the area that has been putting back dirty hydro into our system. So we had to shut down because there was so much RF interference. Like there's been so many instances where this place should have just gone under, but it's meant to stay alive for hopefully a long time yet, I hope. So So yeah, that's the history. So those boys started it, and then they went off and did their thing. And Dan still comes by, drops in every now and then, and they actually hired two guys. I'm not sure if anybody will recognize the names Mark Howard or Dave Bottrell. If you don't, look them up. You won't be disappointed. They got their start here under the same tutelage. So the Lamwa brothers and Bob Deutsch. So great discographies from all of those guys. So check out our website if you want to know more about it and read about our gear and the space itself. It's pretty easy. It's grandavenuestudio.com.
Great. Thanks, Amy.
And so you mentioned about analog gear, and we actually started a research workshop on Monday with a presentation of a study that compared people's preferences between mixes laid down on analog consoles and digital versions.
Mm-hmm.
And the statistics show that people actually do prefer the analog side. So some people were definitely happy about this finding. So you mentioned that, and do you want to elaborate on it and maybe play a track that would feature some analog sound?
So, you know, I'm a little biased on the whole topic myself because I get to sit here pretty much every day. I do work out of a couple of other places, but not on a full-time level. Like this seat has my bum print in it, and it's a great pilot seat, that's for sure. So what we have here is it's pretty analog. When I started in 2002, they were just transitioning from 2-inch tape. We still have the 2-inch machine here, but people generally don't have the budget for the tape anymore, and it's getting more expensive and more difficult to find. So unfortunately, the actual medium that we're recording to is a digital system. It's actually from close to where you guys all are. It's a company called Is Technologies, and they make a machine called Radar. We have one called the S Nyquist 5, and their goal when they started the company was to do the best emulation of the sonic sound of 2-inch tape that they could. No real editing capability whatsoever. It's basically glorified tape. So I hate to feel like I'm preaching analog, and then we're actually recording to a digital drive, but it's the closest to analog without being analog. So for me, the analog sound, you can't beat it. I mean, digital is getting closer and closer, but really when you look at it, it's still kind of like a staircase version of a curve, right? And I think we will get to the point where we maybe won't even hear the difference, but I think we'll always feel the difference. So for me, the biggest reason that I love analog is workflow. I'm gonna try to just take this and see if I can just show you guys our sight lines here. So I usually like to stand up when I work. So if I'm standing here at my console, you can see the floor, so you can see our piano. You can kind of see back to the drum booth there. There's a isolation booth over there. It's actually a relatively very small space. So for me, if I have to bury my head in a screen or use a mouse to access any submenus for any EQ or effects or anything like that, I'm taking my attention away from the musician that's out on the floor. So if they look in here and see that my face is not straightforward looking at them for my ears and my eyes, that psychologically says to them, well, she's not paying attention. So anything that I need or anything that they ask for, I reach down and I do it, and it happens. I don't have to go into a computer. I don't have to hear a little bling for something to happen. There's no delay time. There's nothing. It's just like having a conversation with somebody face to face. It's all about workflow and efficiency. So for pretty much 95% of the sessions that we do here, which is a lot of live off the floor recording, it's the way to go. I don't dispute that the digital system is absolutely leaps and bounds incredible for a lot of post-production stuff, soundtrack work, syncing to film, that kind of thing. But for what we do for the most part, we are not switching. For as long as we possibly can keep this stuff operating and keep it going, we'll do it. So, and you can't beat the sound. Like your workshop, you said, like people who don't even really realize what they're listening to, they'll gravitate toward it for the most part. So yeah. Oh, yeah, you wanted a track. So I was gonna play you guys a track from this jazz singer named Chantel Chamberlain. Chantel, nobody really even knows who she is in Canada. She goes to Asia and sells out ginormous stadiums. Beautiful voice. She just sounds like a lovely whiskey. So she brings her band in. Everybody plays live off the floor. We do a couple takes. She sings live off the floor, and everything is kept. And generally, we almost do a live mix right on the fly, and that's what gets used for the record. So for this tune, which one are we using? I think Infectious Slow. What do we have? Drums, acoustic bass, saxophone, trumpet, piano, and her vocal. So all live off the floor, analog. So have a listen.
Fill up space with an infectious slow. Lose yourself in a fine French Bordeaux. Redefine time, the feeling is sublime. A New York minute, my dear, is a crime. Be still, unwind, and now you're feeling fine. No rush, no hurry, forget all your worries. There you go, infectious slow. Switch your gears from a high to a low, as easy as a Sunday so mellow. Here's the place where you set the pace. Let it go, time is erased. Be still, unwind, and now you're...
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Getting lots of shout outs in the chat window there on your work. So you mentioned some of the other engineers that have sort of, come through the studio yourself, how that has sort of played a role within the larger, greater Canadian music economy. I'm really interested in the work, or the work that you've done to in community outreach through the studio and community engagement, and the role of using the studio in that capacity. That I don't think many of us think that would be a traditional, obviously, sort of application of a studio space. Could you talk maybe a little bit just about some of the successes and the motivation
Sure.
for that activity?
So I don't know how much anybody knows about the Hamilton area. It gets a bad rap, really. The city is kind of known as Steel City, but if you approach it from a different angle, we actually have, it's like the waterfall capital of, I don't know if it's North America or the world. We have an incredible amount of green space here. But we also have a large population of people that are using social services. A lot of kids who are lost. They don't have guardians. They don't have parents. Just a lot of trouble. So one of the things I'm going to go back again about the Lanois brothers choosing this location. So when they chose this location in the 70s, it was a very, not an affluent area of the city, but it's a lot different than it is now. So this general neighborhood is a popular place for some serious drugs, a lot of prostitution. And with that, you see that the children are generally the victims of what their parents are doing. So we see a lot of kids who just kind of fall through the cracks. So a few of them have lived on the street, and we've brought them in over the years and just let them have a taste of what it's like to be surrounded by people who will let them speak and have an opinion on something, and something as joyous as music. So that's not really associated with anything other than just an individual need that we see. Because you just never know. You never know the seeds that you plant. And as I said, I have a giant family myself. My dad is one of 27 children, and my mom is one of 14, and none of them play an instrument. And when I think about that, I think, why is that? There's no way that that genetic material isn't there. It's just because they were never given the opportunity. So giving a kid the opportunity to come in and sit at a piano, a C7 Yamaha Grand, or a drum kit where no one's going to yell at them for making noise, you just never know where that's going to lead. So we've done some of that officially then for associations like Big Brothers Big Sisters, and there's a Hamilton charity called An Instrument for Every Child, where they take kids from schools who may not have the financial backing to go into lessons or to buy an instrument, or even just the support system, or parents that would think it's a really dumb idea to get involved in music in any way. They take those kids and they teach them how to play an instrument. They teach them how to play with a group. So then we bring them in here and they record a song that they've been rehearsing throughout the year. And it is always a blast. It is so much fun because not only are they having fun, they're nervous as heck, but watching those nerves melt away is a lot of fun. Watching them be really respectful of somebody else's space. I know that sounds kind of silly, but that's a huge lesson. And they're all learning that when they come in here, and they're learning how to respect our instruments. And that goes a long way. There's a association called Hamilton Neighbor to Neighbor. It's a food bank based company here in Hamilton. So we raise a lot of money for them through in-studio performances that we've had. So we had Gord come in and do a concert for a few lucky people, and we donated a bunch of money from that to Neighbor to Neighbor. Ron Sexsmith has come in and done one. Garnet Rogers, who's the brother of Stan Rogers. Oh my gosh, who am I missing? Lanois. Dan Lanois came in. He did one, and we donated a bunch of money to Neighbor. And I hate to say we have an ulterior motive in doing any of this stuff, because we don't. But there's often times in a small community like this where we're all small businesses and we're all struggling, especially right now, and we all need each other's help. And sometimes if we need to call on someone else for help, it's nice that we have that in our back pocket, so to speak, that we've helped out before, and we've helped out kids before, and we've helped out the community before. And oftentimes artistic-based companies and artists themselves are the first to respond to emergencies and to terrible situations. I mean, look at it just worldwide with hurricanes and such. Musicians are always the first to try and have a concert to raise money. And musicians generally don't have any money themselves, but we're always the first to try and help other people. And I think that sweet karma that just keeps on giving. And it's so fun to watch a kid who, there's this one little girl a few years ago, in the dead of winter in February, I would watch her come out of her house in shorts and a tank top with shoes that didn't fit to go to Tim Hortons and bring back a ton of looked like triples for whoever was in her apartment. All day long, we'd be watching this rotating door of men coming and going, and she was miserable. But just bringing her in here to spend the afternoon and having her, keep notes for me, use a pencil, learn handwriting. You can't beat getting to have that experience and have that relationship with someone who generally doesn't really have anybody. And music just has the ability of making that connection all the more spiritual. So sorry if that went on a different tangential area than you were hoping for, Kirk.
No, that's amazing work. No, it's just brilliant to hear. And your perspective on that is fantastic. So thank you for that. So then to switch it a little bit, I just wanted to pick your brain about this idea of the Canadian sound and the role or not of the studio and your work in that sort of, or just your general thoughts in that area. And then I think we've got some music to play following that.
Yes, yeah. I'll address the one part of your question about sort of the role of a studio, and then I'll get into the other, I'll piecemeal it a bit. I think the role of a good studio is to provide really great quality of gear, and also people that know how to use it. I'll quote another one of my favorite lines of Bob Deutsch. And a lot of people don't like it when he says this, but I think it's just brilliant. He says, yeah, you know, like, I just got a bunch of dental equipment. I found it really cheap on Kijiji and I put it in my basement. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to give people discounted dental work. Do you guys want to come over on the weekend and, you know, we can spend Saturday just like pulling your teeth? So having a studio that has tools, people that know what they're doing, and ears. You can't teach people how to have ears. It's just, it's a born gift. That's the role of a studio. So nowadays, people, you know, they think they can do it all themselves. And I've been hearing some great recordings coming out of home studios and basements and whatnot. But I think musicians and creative people need an inspiring space. And oftentimes, you know, their friend's basement is not the most inspiring space. So you walk into a room like this or our main room there, and it's not grandiose, but it's tailored for creativity. And we are here specifically for that artist. And our goal is a shared goal with them, which is their project is the most important thing in our lives at that moment, because it has to be, because it's the most important thing for them. So a lot of other people that I've spoken with that do a lot of home recording work, they say that even just booking an actual session at a professional studio holds you accountable to somebody else for your own work. And it really has a good way of counteracting procrastination. And I know that sounds really ridiculous because so many people have great gear at home, but I think a lot of people would rather just sit around in their pajamas on the weekend and maybe do some recording. And if you actually call me and book the time in our calendar, then you have to show up. And that goes a long way. So, you know, I think having the space to come to helps get that internal dialogue out and an intangible thought or an intangible musical thought out to become a tangible thing that other people can hear. So in terms of the Canadian sound, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this since you brought it up with me about a month ago. And this is going to sound terrible, but I feel like there isn't really a Canadian sound like there was. I think that, and please correct me, because here's the other thing. I haven't bought myself a record in a long time, because usually at the end of the day, the last thing I want to do is listen to more music because we're just immersed in it all day long. But I feel like back in the day when things were just starting to get rolling, you know, you take your Gordon Lightfoots and Neil Young, oh gosh, Joni Mitchell. There's dozens of what I would call the trailblazers of that time. I think that Canada definitely had a sound then, and it was because record companies still didn't have those big budgets to throw into Canadian music. So the albums had to be done on budgets for the most part. Therefore, a lot of the recordings were done the way that we like to record, which is live off the floor, you know, fixing a few mistakes when they happen, punching in, adding overdubs and whatnot after the fact, but you get that sense of connection and of a feeling of playing music together. And I feel like we've lost that a little bit. And I don't know if it's just because that kind of music or that kind of process has gone by the wayside, or if we're too mainstream or we're too close to the States and what's popular in that industry. So I don't know, like, I feel like back then people actually got into the business because they had something to say. They had to get some creative energy out. Now I feel like it's shifted into, I want to be seen, I want to be heard, I want to get rich, and I want to be famous. And I feel that taking that motivation and flipping it like that has taken away the real genuine feel of what I think Canadian music really used to be. And we've lost a little bit of that, I feel. So I know that's a pretty negative answer to maybe what you were hoping for, but in terms of a place like this, a lot of people will say that Grand Avenue was the birthplace of ambient music because Dan Lanois and Harold Budd and Brian Eno worked on some of the earliest lo-fi ambient music records here, and it wasn't really a thing in North America until they were doing it. And that's a huge thing. That really did affect music worldwide. And of course, Brian Eno went on to produce, U2 and Coldplay and oh gosh, you know, Roxy Music he was in and all of that stuff. So it's had an impact on an international scale, but I think Canada is losing its identity a little bit. And I really hope that that can shift at some point. So I'd actually be really interested to hear your perspective on that, because I'm sort of out of the loop in the sense of what's out there and what's popular right now.
That's well, you know, maybe we can revisit this in the Q&A. But Amandine and I have had a good talk about this, and there's the diversity question, which has to be addressed as well. And that there's just so many genres and, you know, artists working in different areas that to sort of single out a single Canadian sound,
Hmm.
maybe a bit. I don't know that we could, but you know, your comment about the process is incredibly useful with
Mm.
regards to evaluating how things were done, and I think that that removes the genre and puts it back into the process of the actual, you know, art and skill of how we make records. So that's great perspective to have. We had some music on this front.
Oh, right. Who are we going to say?
What do we
Oh,
do?
yeah, not so much going with the Canadian sound. And I saw somebody say Drake and The Weeknd. Absolutely right. But a bit, you could say that they're from anywhere on the planet. They don't necessarily sound like they're, you know, from Canada, so to speak. So the song I want to play is another jazz song, sorry. But this doesn't really go with the question about the Canadian sound. It sort of goes with the role of a studio. So this jazz band in particular are way too big to play music in somebody's basement, and they have to come in. They have to have sight lines with each other, and most of all, they just wanted to have some fun. Again, all live off the floor. Two horns, drums, percussion, acoustic bass. I'm missing something. Oh, keyboard, electric guitar. Yeah. So I think we're listening to Favorite Grooves, Sunday Walkin'. One of the things I really like about that track too, just going back to sort of the role of a studio and the benefits of a studio is you can really hear the room in that tune. You can hear the piano bleeding into the saxophone mics, and there comes a point on a technical level where you just stop trying to fight that and just go with it. So you're always going to have to deal with bleed in those types of situations, but making it a part of the sound is kind of key. So.
Great, that was a very good track. So I had a curious question about, so you mentioned the importance of the way you interact with musicians and psychology. And you also mentioned the workflow that goes with the type of technology you're using in the studio and a lot of live off the floor sessions. But I know from your discography that you have worked on tons of different type of genres that definitely imply different type of workflow. So I'm curious about, do you interact with musicians differently in terms of like how much you get involved and stuff, depending on the genres or the workflow?
Usually pretty involved. One of the things that we tell people who are getting started as assistant engineers, one of the biggest pieces of advice is just basically shut up. Shut up if you're not spoken to. We don't want your opinion. You know, you're not entitled to it at this point unless the artist actually asks you for it. Then have at it, but be diplomatic about it and be nice. So for me, right now at this point in my career, most of the artists that I work with are repeat. I hate to say repeat business because I hate using the word business, but they're repeat offenders, I guess. And I've worked with them on several projects. So there's a real mutual respect, and oftentimes they don't hire a producer. We kind of fill that role ourselves. And in terms of how I interact with people from different genres, I think the only thing that really changes is I'll get my swear tongue out with certain bands more so than others, because you know I've got on a Monday I could be doing gospel quartet, Tuesday could be classical, Wednesday Indigenous drum circle, Thursday punk. You know, there are certain kinds of bands that you're a little more comfortable to be, I guess, yourself around in a sense. But for the most part, I just try to keep it pretty consistent. The way that I work doesn't change at all. I try to work quickly and efficiently because nobody has the budget for anything other than that anymore. You know, gone are the days of record companies paying for 2 days of kick and snare sounds. So my general goal is when anybody walks in the door, whether it's a single artist or a group, I want them to be playing their instruments pretty quickly. I want to have all of the stuff that I can possibly have set up and ready to go long before they even walk in the door, for a number of reasons, because that gives me a chance to troubleshoot without having a house full of people here. It gives me a chance to do line checks, battery checks, have pencils sharpened ready for them at their workstations. Everything other than their actual instrument is ready to go for them. And what that does when they walk in and they see that I put some foresight into the session, psychologically that helps them get started. I like in terms of dress, I try to dress comfortably and professionally. We've had some assistants in here that some of our gospel guys have said, you know, I'm not quite comfortable with such and such hanging around because they look a certain way. So I know that's so taboo these days, but you still have to exude an air of professionalism because these people are trusting you with something that's really, really close to them, and you have to treat it with the utmost of respect and treat it the same way that they feel about it. So, yeah.
Okay, so you've talked about a little bit about some assistants and interns and such in the studio. So I just have a question about the gender balance there. What you see on from your side, because Amandine and myself, see what the education sort of side looks like. People coming to access the training through that.
Mhm.
So, a question about what's the balance that you see, and then we also have the Sound Girls chapters here. So some advice, some thoughts on for the next generation of women producers and recording engineers going forwards.
I think it's going to, and I mean this in the most positive way, it's going to become a complete non-question, I think, hopefully within the next decade. So when I started almost 20 years ago, I was an anomaly, and that was kind of weird because my first days here, you know, I'm working with guys who've been in the business for longer than I've been alive by a long shot for the most part, and you have to learn how to deal with some pretty shitty comments sometimes. I think that young men and people of any gender have to deal with some pretty shitty comments sometimes, based on appearances or whatnot. So my policy has always been, I don't want to be known as a female engineer. I want to be known as a damn good engineer. It doesn't really matter to me what's between my legs or anybody else's legs for that matter. And I'm a good engineer, and people that I've worked with for a long time will attest to that. And I would like to know, so you said that you're seeing a little bit of a shift. So when I was in my recording class, there were 2 of us. So what are you guys seeing, like on a professional education level? Because here it's still very much a man's world, and that is shifting. And scientifically, women, we have really kick-ass ears. We can hear really great frequency range. I think a lot of women get deterred by the life balance, and that, again, that shouldn't really be an issue. If I had to raise a family or financially pay to have my kids looked after, I couldn't have done this. It just wouldn't have been a thing that I could do, because there's no 9 to 5, especially when you're getting started. Like, I don't remember having a weekend off, a holiday, an evening. I just worked. I worked for my entire decade of my 20s. I don't even remember a birthday. It was just completely dedicated to this room. And I think that as women, we did at that point have to work harder to prove ourselves, because we were deemed as being a little lesser than male engineers. But I definitely think that that's changing. We've had one young woman assistant since I've been here, and she has been absolutely outstanding. Forget about the gear and having a great set of ears. She would do all the outer radius stuff too, that we all still have to do, because it's a small business and it's basically a house. We all still have to clean toilets. We have to shovel the snow. We have to wash the dishes. And, I'd get here on a winter morning and she'd already be here shoveling the front steps. I know that sounds like it's completely unrelated to making music, but if we can't trust somebody in our building to wash a mug or to clean a toilet or pick something up off the floor or vacuum, why would we trust them around all of that stuff? So we hire based on that, and the want and desire to be able to do what would be deemed like menial tasks and not have that sense of entitlement that they're above all of that. So I've been sitting on a lot of juries for Factor and Junos and whatnot, and I'm seeing a lot of women's names in the technical categories and in the technical credits on records. And I think it's going to come to a point where it's going to be 50-50. I really do. I don't think we're ever going to completely take over the market and it will just be mostly female engineers. But I think we're well on our way to some serious equality there, that's for sure. So again, sorry, I interrupted my own question to you guys. I was curious as to what's the balance? What are you seeing?
Well, we have the answers have been coming in on the chat. We have Paul Johnson, who teaches at McEwen in their program here, Amandine and myself, and McEwen 50%. My program's about 25 to 30, and
Okay.
it looks like ULETH is about 11%. So
Wow. Those are good numbers. Those are really good numbers. So I don't know if anybody's a Sound Magazine reader at all, but if you compare where they were 20 years ago to where they are now, there's a heck of a lot more women in the ads, in the articles, on the cover, all of those things. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. But again, I think we will get to the point where it won't even be part of the question, because it will just be like, women can be doctors, when there are women lawyers, there are women that do pretty much everything. So it'll just be another one of those career paths that's going to be an option for people. I hope, anyway.
Oh, and we have Marcella has let us know that 7 out of 33 at Algonquin. So
7 out of 33. That's good. That's good.
Thanks for providing those answers, everyone.
Yeah, so I think we have a final question for you before we open it to the Q&A. So from an educator perspective, I found out that the expectations of the new generation of music production students is a lot about learning the DAW, digital audio workstation, and how to get signal in the studio. And how do you think working with bands and learning how to record and mix acoustic electric instruments could benefit the artistry as artist producers, even if they want to focus on electronic music, hip hop, EDM, etc.?
I think I'll go to that. I'll get to that in a second. Something I did want to say was anybody, I know we've got a lot of people here who are aspiring to get into this crazy world of recording and whatnot. My biggest piece of advice is redefine your definition of success, because we live in a society, especially in the music biz, where, you know, to be successful, you have to have money in the bank and you have to have a great car, or you have to have a gold record on your wall or whatnot. I'm telling you guys, if you can pay your rent and groceries and maybe car payments and gas, that is hugely successful in the arts and creative sector, especially in recording. It's a non-sustainable business, especially right now with COVID. Musicians, well, we all know, like there's no live music happening. So it's a really, really scary place. So it's going to be scary for quite some time. So get into it and don't be discouraged, because it's going to be really hard. It's going to be hard to maintain relationships, either with a significant other or with family, because frankly, they're probably not going to get the amount of time investment for very little. What they would see is probably very little return. But the fact that you get to work on something that you really like to do and that you're good at and that you're passionate about, and you're actually taking an intangible thing from somebody's brain and making it something, that is just the coolest job on the planet. I don't care what anybody says, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And like we struggle financially. There have been times in my life, especially early on, where I didn't know where groceries were coming from, but something always happened. Something always sort of played through. So I'll get to your actual question, Amandine. I just wanted to sort of make that clear, because I feel like if I had known that when I was younger, it's not that it would have changed my mind about anything, but it would have been sort of easier to know what to expect. And a lot of, I know my recording class, when I was taking it, sort of led us to believe that, one, there was a lot of work. There wasn't, and there still isn't really. And that we would be working with our favorite bands right off the get-go, and that we would be financially viable. And all of those things were ginormous lies. But I think it's a really good lesson to learn that does happen. It can happen for some people, but it's a very, very small percentage. So just keep at it, and if you can put food on your table, that's damn good. That's damn good. Okay, so in terms of working with bands and artists, even if your focus is going to be electronic instruments, again, music is all about the connection with people and whoever you're creating it with, whether it's somebody sitting next to you in a workstation environment or on the other side of the glass. I always tell anybody who's getting involved in the recording biz, do a session on tape. Do a session on 2-inch tape. Even if you're not going to use it ever, sit in on one, learn how to razor blade cut tape, splice it back together, learn where the actual terms of cut, copy, paste come from, because that's where they got their start. That's how music was made. Listen to the Beatles records when there was, 4 tracks, for God's sake. And now we're so spoiled from a technical perspective. We have infinite number of tracks that we can use. But if you can get yourself in a situation where you don't have that luxury, just to learn, it will really help you, even in the digital realm, in the digital workstation realm. Having knowledge of acoustic instruments will help you place electronic instruments and anything in the frequency range in a better spot, in a better pocket in the mix. So one of the pieces of paper that I give a lot of people that come through, you can probably Google it and find it pretty quick. There's a image of a piano keyboard, and it has instruments and where they sit in the frequency range. And having that knowledge, just from an actual acoustic instruments perspective, will really really go a long way for anybody who wants to do this for a living. And just the interaction with bands and artists is something that you need to experience, that, because you're balancing the psychology of all the people who are out on the floor, who are probably 4 or 5 of the most different thinking people or they're fighting with each other because they're a married couple. You have to learn how to deal with that and then balance your own sounds and worry about your own gear and worry about what's going on in your own life, all while maintaining a crazy session on the other side of the glass. So even if you want to strictly stick with like an introverted digital workstation working on solo projects, you really should have that experience of what it's like to do a live session as well. It will give you an appreciation for the other side, that's for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it's useful for some of the students here who sometimes question why they have to go through those traditional recording techniques, even though they don't feel that it's connecting so much with the music they're making.
Well, think about the samples too. A lot of the samples and the electronic components of electronic music are derived from actual real instruments, and so you need to be able to decipher that and place them in the pocket.
Yeah, and they're already compressed and they're already EQ'd, and that's good to know what is compression and EQ. For sure. So we would like to propose you to play maybe a last track before we launch the Q&A, so people can start thinking about their question. And
what did we have? You know, I was gonna play one after question number 1, just about some of my background starting in the church. So when I did get a job in the studio, my parents didn't get it, and frankly they don't really still, and it's always going to be one of those, when are you going to get a real job kind of thing. So that's a question that you're probably all going to hear for many years, but whenever I get the opportunity to work on Christian music, I'm always very eager to call them and kind of just be like, hey, I told you so, we can work on Christian music here too. So I was going to play a track from a Nigerian couple who moved to Canada a few years back, and we just finished a record, and they're winning all sorts of gospel music awards, and their names are Falarin and Keziah, and the tune, we kind of truncated it from about 7 minutes down to 2 minutes. It's called Jesus is Alive. So the core band for this, all recorded live off the floor, and then electronic components added after the fact. Some overdubs added after the fact, harmony vocals added after the fact, and then lead vocals, final lead vocals added after all the instruments. So this is Keziah and Falarin.
Are you ready? It's time for praise and worship. If you love it, stand up on your feet. Everybody, 1, 2, 3, cheer. Hey, put your hands together. Wave your hands from side to side. Come on, let's praise him. Praise to the one who dwells on high. All adoration belongs to him. We join together and worship him. All blessing and glory and honor belongs to our God. In this nation, in this city, in our family, you're come on! Clap, clap, shout unto God with the voice of triumph. Come on! Jesus is alive. Hey! David is singing, Savior reigns. Jesus is
Thank you. So as I put in the chat, if you have any questions, there they are. Hands are coming. Juan,
a
you're
lot
up.
of people.
Hi everybody. Well, thank you so much for everything, Amy. Really appreciate everything you're saying.
Oh, you're
Um,
welcome.
no, yeah, fantastic for real. I have kind of a question of a hypothetical case now that I think it's a little appropriate for the times we're living. But say that you were commissioned to go record a band off outside of your studio in another country, something like that, and you have to take with you like an aid input interface or something like that, your microphones. What are some of the limitations you can already expect from recording? Obviously, from the number of inputs, but more in terms of the quality of the sound and your workflow. What are some of the limitations, and what are some of the maybe positive things that you could get of something like that?
Oh boy, I would love to have that experience. That'd be pretty amazing. I think the furthest I've gone to do actual recording actually was Victoria, oddly enough. And I've done a little bit at home as well. So the one thing that I take with me when I go places that actually have pretty decent quality, um, and I do so with the intent of usually bringing my stuff back here to do my final mix. I've had great luck with Zoom recorders. They make some pretty decent gear, pretty user friendly, and it travels well. So I was in Newfoundland for a few months, just dealing with some family illness, and I took two 12-track Zoom recording boards with me. They fit right in my carry-on luggage. Has built-in Phantom, all that stuff. I took a couple of pretty economically priced Rode microphones and got some really great recording done that way. But again, my intent was to come back here because the default format for a Zoom recorder is high resolution WAV files, which is perfectly compatible with our radar system. So my intent is always to do my final mix here. If I was to mix somewhere else, I don't know what the limitations would be, because I would certainly most likely need an assistant to show me how to use any type of complete digital workstation. So that would be a detriment, but I would love to have that learning experience as well. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Kelsey, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hello. First of all, thank you so much for giving this talk. I thought it was fantastic. Um, I'm a very soon to be graduate. I'm also looking at grad school right now, and all that I am ever hearing about is that studios are dying. Studios are going away. You're never going to work in a studio. Um, what you are is you're working in a full functioning commercial studio, doing live sessions, acoustic music, and I really feel like that's what I want to do. Do you think that studios are really going to go away forever, or is there something inherent in the studio that will keep it clinging on for a while?
I really hope that it's a business model that can sustain itself. We saw about a decade ago a ginormous change in Toronto. I don't know how familiar everybody is with the scene there, but a lot of the big studios that were iconic and legendary that have held on for years just couldn't do it anymore. Um, and we're fortunate in the sense that we can stick it out, and we've stuck it out. A lot of that is because of where we are, because we're not in a giant city, and operating an arts-based business is it's a costly venture on a business model whose clientele relies on people who generally don't have a ton of money. Um, so I think places like us, I hate to use the word boutique studio because I don't really like the term, but we are smaller. It's more sustainable than a giant sort of gymnasium corporate studio atmosphere. But I think what we will find, and I really hope we do, is that people will want to start coming to studios again. I know a lot of independent artists are sort of afraid of the more known spaces, because it takes it away from that grittiness and that vulnerability that some people really need to thrive and be creative. But at the same time, walking into a space where you have great gear, and again, like I said earlier, a team that has your back, and the sole goal is to get your song out, or your songs, or your project. I hope that that's something that can sustain itself. But I think we're in for a bit of a hard time, and we're going to see a lot of studios go in the next couple of years, basically because of the pandemic. And I hate to say it that way, because it's not like it's the only sector that's been affected. We all know that the world is being completely decimated, a lot of businesses by this right now, but it's going to take a hard hit on live music venues. I'm sure you guys are seeing that, restaurants, that kind of thing. And a lot of musicians rely on restaurants for their income. So studios have been hit. I know a lot of close friends of mine that are just have places in Toronto and out west, and they're on the verge. So I hope it can sustain itself, because music will always need to be made, and there's always going to need to be places to do that. So as long as you guys keep making music and composing music and wanting to make records, then there has to be studios to some degree.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Chris, your question, please.
Great. Yeah, quick one. Given that you are so big on analog, I was just curious how, if at all, you listen to music in your spare time. I know you said you don't like to listen so much because you're always listening, but if you were to go and listen, what would you listen on?
What would I listen on? Actually, that's sort of something that I wanted to touch on a little bit earlier in the chat, but I will address a couple things there with your question, Chris, because one of the things that it's a downfall to doing this for a living. I'm sure a lot of you guys who are aspiring to be engineers and producers are also songwriters yourself, and you're musicians yourself. I think you have to be prepared for the fact that your own stuff is definitely going to be put on the back burner because you have to focus on everybody else's material. The other negative effect that I've found is I've lost my love of going to hear live music, and I lived for it for a very long time because I can't get out of my own head when I go to a club or a concert. I can't stop dissecting. I can't stop listening for mistakes, because that's what I have to do here all day long. I can't seem to separate myself from it. And that's one of the goals that I want for the next few years, is to get that love back of live music, because you can't beat it. You can't beat going to hear a really great band play together. So for me, Chris, listening to music after I leave my sessions doesn't happen often. I usually want pretty quiet. But if I do listen to music, I'll generally listen quite quietly on my system at home. So I've got Bryston power amp running an old Marantz amplifier and some nice Bose speakers that I quite like. So I don't know if you're sort of looking for the gear chain at all in that sense, but that's what I do. Yeah.
That's great. Great answer. And then to extend that a little bit, if I can, do you listen on vinyl then, or do you stream? And where does streaming come into play?
I don't stream much. I just can't get past the quality of a lot of what I hear. And bad internet, it's choppy. I don't like what the big companies are doing for the pocketbooks of artists. I had a Christmas song of my own covered by a jazz singer, and it got something like 3.2 million streams. And I think I made $240. So it's just not right, you know? So I tend to not stream. I do like vinyl. I still listen to CDs, and I'm waiting for these guys to come back. I don't think that's going to happen, by the way, but
Small sector, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read this, or would you like to read it out? I will read it out, it looks like. So we have a question. Do you think that home studios are creating influx of talent to the mainstream, or is it just increasing the amount of noise you have to get through to find a really good track these days?
That's a good point. I am finding that a lot, just with the onslaught of people making music, which is lovely in a sense. I mean, there's a lot of music being made. A lot of people are channeling that creative energy. But I think getting anywhere in the business or getting your stuff heard is becoming more and more difficult in a sense, when it's actually also becoming easier, because we have these methods of sharing over the internet and streaming and downloading and all these ways of getting music out there, but people are being inundated by it. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody subscribes to channels that sort of pick songs based on your likes of other songs. And if you're finding that you're finding some great music that way, or you're just getting fed some real stinkers, like I don't know. It's my husband subscribes to one of those services, and for the most part they've got him nailed. They've got his taste down pretty good. But sometimes some stuff I hear and I go, how did that even get made? You know, I don't quite understand it. So yeah, I don't know.
So we have a question from Laura. What benefits do you see in audio engineers being formally trained in some of the areas as musicians, such as music history and traditional ear training? So you spoke about theory, but I'm curious on your thoughts on the other areas.
Oh, that's interesting. I think especially if you're recording, we do a lot of indigenous music here, and having the knowledge of the history of where that comes from and what the language means has really helped a lot. And I really enjoy working on that. And some of the instruments that you have to record that wouldn't be considered mainstream instruments, it's really nice to know the history of where they come from, why they sound the way they do, what they're made from. Because a lot of instruments that are made, especially out of wood, generally don't bode well in the Canadian climate. So we have to deal with all sorts of weird vibrations in the recording process. I've got one guy that has a really strange acoustic sort of bass guitar, but it's not, and it just keeps splitting every winter. It splits right down the middle, and we've got to deal with, we put duct tape over it to try to stop the vibration. So just knowing the history of some of those instruments, I think would be very useful, actually. Yeah.
Thank you for Laura. And I think Christina has a question.
You mentioned that you had you made yourself indispensable. So I was kind of wondering what those qualities were. What were those indispensable skills? Obviously, being able to fix things, but yeah.
I have a hard time answering that question myself because I don't like tooting my own horn, so to speak. But one of the things I talked about was still the doing the menial tasks. So not being afraid to clean up after people, clean up after the sessions. That's really key. But the biggest reason that I get hired and people like to work with me is that I work really quickly, and that it really isn't a quality that probably would have been sought after a few decades ago. But right now, like if I've got a band here and they're recording a song, I always keep notes of what needs to be fixed. And generally before they even put their headphones down to come in and listen, I'll have fixed those things. I've done it quickly without drawing attention to them. And they're listening back to a really great rough mix within 5 to 10 minutes of finishing kind of a take. So those kind of things. And going above and beyond. I know this sounds really kind of strange, but it goes back to the human connection. So if you're working with someone for the first time and you find out, you know, what their partner's name is, or what their kids' names are, or if they have a pet, what their favorite food is, keep notes and use it the next time they come in. Hey, you know, how's Christina today? Or how's your dog? I know last time he wasn't feeling too well. You know, that kind of stuff has nothing to do with music whatsoever. But without it, you've lost that connection. So if you can create a human connection with somebody, you're going to be a massive tool to any studio.
Thank you. What's your dog's name? I saw him. He's like lying in the
My
trash.
dog's, he's Windsor. He's where is he?
Like
He's sleeping.
Town.
Yeah, he's a 120-pound German Shepherd who thinks he's tiny. And he loves to be on records. He loves to howl and sing, and he's been on so many recordings. It's great. Yeah, I think actually people come here for the dog. They don't give a crap about me or the gear. It's just like, we want the dog. I get it. I totally get it.
Okay, we have one more question, and then I think we will let you get on with your evening because it's getting quite late there.
Is it?
What would a new engineer have to do in your studio to really stick out?
Be okay with putting the cell phone away, because we have a strict cell phone off policy. And you wouldn't believe the withdrawal that people go through when we tell them that they have to turn it off. And if someone is willing to turn it off for the length of a session, which sometimes might only be 2 hours, that goes a long way with us. Another one, and this shouldn't even be a thing, but it is. So many people can't write legibly anymore because they rely so much on phones or iPads or typing. If I have someone who's keeping notes for me of time code or any of that information and I can't read it, it's not legible, they're not going to be here for very long. We had one guy who, whenever he took a message from the phone, we had no idea what he had written on the sheet of paper. We didn't know if it was a person's name, a phone number, if it was a pizza order. We had no clue whatsoever. So little life skills like that really go a long way. And I know this is also should be kind of a given, but using your ears. So like if we've got an instrument out on the floor, let's just use an acoustic guitar, for example. Books will tell you where you should place your microphone, and that's always kind of a neat starting point. But go out, use your ears, get the person to play, and work yourself around that person. It always looks weird. They kind of look at you like, what the hell are you doing? But get your ears right up to their instrument, move around, and see where you feel the best sound is coming from. And if we have an assistant that comes in and does that innately, we just kind of look at each other and go, okay, they're actually using their ears, not these guys, because we're such a visually based society. We're really told to just kind of ignore these guys and focus so much on our eyeballs.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because sometimes I ask students to just go in the live room and listen, and I get, oh, we fix it in post. And this is, or is it a European thing? I got several times too. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think we have one last quick question, maybe.
Yeah.
Alison asked how do you make the tabla?
Oh, the tabla. So in that group that we listened to, so the tabla player was sitting on an elevated, almost like a drum platform. So he had a few different drums he brought with him. We mic'd from underneath using U87s. I'm not sure if you know what those guys are. And then from the top of where he was playing, U87s, and then boundary microphones sitting on the actual surface, which picked up other vibration as well. But the drum itself was so loud that the sound of it was also coming through banjo mics and was coming through the talking flute mic and coming through some other microphones. So you do get a little bit of that bleed sound as well. But again, a perfect example of just using your ears. Go out and have a listen to what the sound sounds like. And if you know your microphones and know what frequencies that they're good at enhancing, then it'll give you a better idea of which microphones to choose. I just find like a nice pair of 87s, you can't really go wrong with them. So that was my choice for the tabla. Do you play?
I actually studied it when I was doing my undergrad, so I was just curious.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an amazing instrument. It's incredible. Here I am. I wanted to preach ears over eyes, but I couldn't help watching the player's hands. Oh my, just incredible. Yeah, incredible. So cool. That's very cool.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that gets us to the end of our evening. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us here. Amandine and I are both been looking for ways to create community during this time of COVID, and I think that I feel like we've done something nice here. So, Amandine, anything that you wanted to add before we say goodnight?
No, just thank you so much, Amy, for all those great tracks and information, and yeah, very, very nice. I had a great time. I didn't see time passing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I missed a lot of things that I kind of wanted to touch on. So if anybody wants to ask me any more questions, just shoot me an email. If my site's easy to find as well. It's right on the Grand Avenue site. And I love answering questions, especially from anybody aspiring to get into this crazy world. So.
Well, that's awesome. And I hope we can invite you on one of our campuses for real at some point. And
that'd be great.
That would be really
Before
good.
you guys go, can you tell me what Sound Girls is? Because I know that you had mentioned it a couple times.
So we have Christina and Carolina. So I don't know who wants to to go. Christina, okay?
I can mention what it is. So Sound Girls is kind of like a collective, international collective of women who are kind of trying to support the next generation of women in audio. And so they provide a lot of training skills and community that's supportive for women. I'll put the website in the chat.
That'd be great.
They're a really great organization. It was formed by a few people at an AES, I think in 2012. One of them is
Nice.
Carrie Keys, who's Pearl Jam's monitor tech, and she's quite an amazing human. And I've just been like so fortunate to meet all these women who are professionals and work in live sound through Sound Girls. So I would definitely encourage people to check it out. There's so many great resources on their websites too, and they're always looking for women mentors. So if you're ever interested in doing something like that with them, I'm sure they would be most grateful.
That would be great.
We've restarted the chapter in Toronto. So there's some really great people out there, and Carolina, I think, is in Montreal. They just started a Montreal chapter. I'm in Alberta, and there's also a Vancouver chapter now. So
Oh, great. Thank you. That's awesome.
yeah, I'll put some info in the chat for you.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
We'll just let that get into the chat, and then we'll say goodnight. So it's captured.
That's great.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there we go.
Okay,
Carolina put it in.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks again. Have a good night.
Have a
All
great
right.
night.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks you.